Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. I'm back with multiple cards for my Christmas card series and also for my November guest stint with Tonic Studios. So today I am showcasing their embossing powders and decided to make multiple cards using several different colors of embossing powder because I couldn't decide on just one to use. So I started with a full sheet of Simon Says Stamps Fog cardstock. It's like one of my favorite shades of just a really nice light neutral gray. And I cut it in half twice. So I have 4 pieces that are 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And then I chose 4 different backgrounds because same thing. I couldn't decide which one to use. So I decided to use 4. And 2 of these, the first 2 are from previous releases. This first one is the holiday background from Simon Says Stamp. And I will have links to everything in the description box below the video. And I am doing my typical kind of mass production setup where I do everything in stages all at the same time. So, I cut down the cardstock first, and then I'm going to do all my heat embossing, and then I'll go on to the next step. And for all my heat embossing, I used my anti-static powder tool first. And then because I'm using background stamps, the easiest way for me to use them is I just flip them face up like so. And then I ink up the stamp with clear embossing ink. And then I bring the paper to the stamp and I use my fingers. And if I'm using, dye inks, color inks, pigment inks, etc., I'll use scrap paper over top of the cardstock just so I don't get it all over my fingers and make a real mess. But when I'm using things like clear embossing ink, I don't have a problem with that at all because I can pretty much avoid getting it on my fingers whatsoever. So after I've stamped it, I use the different colors of embossing powder. So the first one I used soft lilac embossing powder. And then this one is the outline snowflakes background. And I used Serenity blue embossing powder. And then this next background is the Christmas sweater background. I think this was last year's release. I love this one. There's something about like sweater images and patterns that it's just cozy. So had to use this one. And for this one, I used Glacier white embossing powder. I really love how like white on the fog cardstock looks. And all of them, I just pour my embossing powder. I always use coffee filters. I've been doing that for years now. I highly, highly recommend them. It's just easier for me. Because then I can easily funnel them back into the container. I can reuse them if I'm using the same color. If I'm using different colors, I use different coffee filters per color so that I'm not going to contaminate or mix up any of the embossing powder colors when I funnel them back into the container. And coffee filters are compostable, so I can just throw them into my compost pile and they're good to go. So I always grab a different filter for each color. For this last one, I used the new Mod Trees background, which again, I love. And the cool Jade embossing powder. This is another one I love. And I like all colors on gray. Really, gray is just such a perfect neutral. But this cool Jade color with gray was like, oh yes, I think this one probably is my favorite. So after I had done all my stamping, all my heat embossing, I go on to the next step, which is die cutting my sentiments. So I'm using the Happy Christmas wafer dies from Simon, and I am just using my little sidekick machine here since I'm doing multiple die cuts. It fits. This is faster than using my full-size machine. And I'm going to die cut the word die from heavyweight white cardstock. And then the outlines, I'm just going to die cut from VELLUM. So I run all those through. So I have all my die cutting done, set aside in the machine. Then for all of the word dies from the white cardstock, I'm going to pop these out of the scrap of cardstock. And I wanted to heat emboss these as well. I was thinking about stacking all of these like I normally do with word dies, but I was like, I'm doing 4 cards. That is 12 die cuts, tons of stacking. So I was like, I don't feel like doing that. So instead, I decided I was going to heat emboss all of these. So I created a little handle, just scrap cardstock, and I just add some little honeycomb tape. And then this is a total Christina Warner technique. I see her do this in her videos, and I was like, this is perfect. So I just put some like Post-it tape. You can use scrap paper, whatever works for you, just to protect my fingers when I smush the die cut into my clear embossing pad. And I've shown this before in videos, but with this time I'm only doing 1 layer. If I was going to do metallic heat embossing, because Nuvo has a bunch of metallics, and I was going to originally, but I wanted to use this shimmering pearl embossing powder. It's kind of like a white with a bit of sparkle to it. It's just pretty. But if I was going to use metallic embossing, I'd probably do multiple layers, and I've shown that in videos too, because it creates a really fun, almost like it makes the die cut look like a piece of metal. But for these, I just wanted that white, sparkly sort of shimmer. So I did that heat embossing with the shimmering pearl embossing powder. And same thing, I went through and did every single sentiment, all in, you know, one step with all of these. So once they were all heat embossed, I removed them, you know, from the little scrap handles that I had created. And then I just apply little bits of Nuvo adhesive to the backs of the die cut words. And then I'm adhering them to the outlines that I had die cut from VELLUM. So I just get those put into place. They adhered perfectly. I didn't even have to stick any like acrylic blocks or anything down on top of these. Sometimes you do. It just kind of depends on the day and what you're doing. And a lot of times if humidity is a factor, things, you know, tend to want to like curl up and move. But this time I just adhered everything and they were good to go. So I got my little sentiments adhered into place, and I just used really small dabs of this adhesive so that it's not oozing out anywhere. And I only apply just little dots here and there. You don't have to coat the entire back of the sentiment. A little bit goes a long way and it's good to go. So after I got those adhered, I just removed the little dot for the eye in Christmas that I had stuck down to my little handle. And I'm just using my little craft knife just to kind of peel that up because it likes to stick into the embossing powder that's melted onto that little scrap of red cardstock there. So I picked that up and then I'm going to adhere that onto my die cut. And again, did all of them all at once. And then to kind of finish off the outside as well as the insides of the cards, I pulled out Simon's Tiny Words Christmas stamp set. And I have a big scrap of white cardstock here, and I'm just lining up 4 different sentiments from that set. And I'm just using my stamp platform because then I can stamp everything at once. So I'm lining up 4 of the stamps from that set, and I'm going to ink these up with some intense black ink. Stamp these multiple times just to get a good crisp black impression on all these sentiments. And then while I have this out, I'm going to stamp 4 more sentiments from the same set, but this time onto some more fog gray cardstock. Because I decided to use narrower sentiments on the outside, and then I used some of the 2-line sentiments from the set, the little phrases, on the inside of the cards. So I just lined up the fog cardstock and then lined up the 4 more sentiments here and doing the exact same thing. Close the lid of my stamp platform, ink up the stamps with the intense black ink. Once everything's stamped, I can die cut all of these with Simon's sentiment label dies. So having everything stamped already, I can then die cut 2 at once because I use the smallest die for the ones on the white cardstock and the second smallest for the ones on the fog cardstock. So again, it saves a little bit of time to be able to die cut 2 at once. So die cut all of my sentiments, trim them down with the parts that were, you know, hanging off the ends of the sentiments. So after I've got everything ready to go, I can start adhering all of these sentiments to the card fronts that I had embossed at the beginning. So exact same idea. I just apply thin little dots and lines of glue behind the actual die cut words so it doesn't show through the vellum. And doesn't take much adhesive again at all. 1, I don't want it oozing out, and 2, it just doesn't take much. And because I use just regular embossing powders, I didn't use anything with like glitter or anything super chunky. Everything adheres to it, no problem. So I would just adhere my Happy Christmas die cut sentiment, and then I adhered the small little stamped and die cut Tiny Words Christmas to kind of finish it off. And then I would go and do the next card front, the next one, and sped this up in editing here. I wish I could work this fast. It would make things go so much smoother. But at the same time, if I could work this quickly, I'd make 10 times more of a mess, I'm sure, because as it is, I'm always like knocking things over and dropping things, which I do when I do the inside of the card. Thankfully, the little sentiment I drop when I start the insides of the cards, it actually fell glue face up, because usually it falls glue face down and I have to redo everything. So I go along and adhere everything to all the sentiments to these embossed card panels. Oh, and those panels, after they were heat embossed off camera, I die cut all of them with the largest of the Simon stitched rectangle wafer dies. So it just gave it that nice little stitch edge around the perimeter. Plus it die cut them all smaller than 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. So they'll just be framed nicely on my card bases, which are 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch heavyweight white note cards. So I'm going to adhere all of these now to my card bases. And all these cards are very flat, very mailable. You could totally pop things up with foam tape and all that, but I just decided today to keep things flat and simple. This is also faster. If I was only doing, you know, 1 or 2 cards, I'd, you know, start popping things up with foam tape and adding the extra dimension and, you know, going all out like I usually do. But other times it's kind of nice to be able to, you know, get these all whipped up, and they'll be easy to just pop in an envelope and mail out. So I got everything adhered to the card bases, and then here's where I put glue, drop. But thankfully, dropped adhesive side up, so I could finally get that adhered in the right spot. So adhered all the sentiments on the inside. You could leave it here, but I had to add a little bit of bling. You can just, it's Christmas, you got to add some bling. So I pulled out some Studio Caudia Crystal Clear Fusion Sequins. These are some of my favorites, as well as some Studio Caudia Iridescent Ice Flakes that I've been hoarding for a while. I don't think I've used these on anything because I'll open the container and pet them and then I put them away. But I decided to pull them out and use them on these cards. So I kind of sprinkled them rather liberally on all of my cards here. Just kind of mixing up the little snow-shaped crystals and the sequins. And then I'm just going to adhere them with that same Nuvo glue. Just little dabs of the glue. Pick up the crystal or the sequin with my little jewel picker and then press that down. And then I can just set these aside for a few minutes to let them dry. And once they're dry, everything is good to go. So as always, I will have a link below the video to my blog post. It'll have all the pictures. It'll have picture links to the supply used. There will also be a supply list at the end of the description box as well if you want to check out what I used to make these cards. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping and commenting on my videos. I really appreciate it. And I will see you all very soon in the next one. Bye.